A few quick things. Of course, we're on Rumble. Let us, tell your friends and everything about it. And especially like tonight, um, Josh needs to get his name out and everything. So tell everybody about, we live stream and record this, pass this around so that people can get to know Josh. And it'll be good for him. It's really hard for him to actually go and see everybody, so I hope he takes advantage of opportunities like this to be able to speak, and especially where they're recorded so that they can be passed around, because he's going to have it's a long hill, a tough hill to climb right now to be able to get his name out there and get people to know him. So be sure to do that. Again, America 250. This year's the 250th anniversary of our great nation, and continue to say it. We wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for what our founders did 250 years ago. And in that, we're actually out of Stand Up for Idaho is raffling off a carved flag here. It's it's a fundraiser for us, and it's to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation, the birth of our nation. And if you're interested in it, it's a raffle, $20 a ticket, and we're going to sell tickets until the 4th of July next year, or this year, I guess it is, and then we'll draw and see who wins it. Real quick, how many people here, just quick show of hands, knows what an Article 5 convention is? Okay, well, an Article 5 convention basically is where it is a thing that's identified in the Constitution that you can have an Article 5 convention, and it's sort of nebulous on what happens, but that is if the states want to make amendments to the Constitution or do things like that, then you can get 2/3 of the states together, petition to say they want to have a convention, and that will force Congress to call a convention. I encourage you to go read what the article actually says. The problem that we have is actually today, even yesterday and today, the House, it's in Boise here, there's two bills. It's two resolutions, HCR 23, which on congressional term limits, and HCR 25, which is a balanced budget amendment. What they're trying to do is get our House to say that they will put a resolution that they want to have Article 5 convention, or a convention of states, or a CONCON is what they call them. I have a big problem with that, and Stand Up for Idaho doesn't stand up. Well, let me put it this way. We don't get vocal about a lot of things. We try to, but there are certain things that we will, and I will on this. And Article 5 convention, there's a lot of unknowns about it. If you study and see what's going on, there's a concern that, well, there are no rules stated in the Constitution about how a convention of states or an Article 5 convention would be run. And it is perceived that, or believed actually, that Congress will call the convention, and then Congress writes the rules. And Congress writes the rules, that means everything. There's nothing in the Constitution that actually says anything more about what rights the states have or anything. Even it doesn't even say how ratification of the amendments will occur. So it's a crapshoot. It really, really is. And so I would call your legislators and say, no, we don't want an Article 5 convention. I ran for state senate here a couple of years ago and actually had an organization called the U.S. Term Limits. And it's a big coalition that's been out there for several years trying to get an Article 5 convention on term limits. And I was on the phone with the chairman of them for a good half hour, and he was trying to convince me that I ought to support an Article 5. And at the end of the day, and I'd ask him questions such as, who writes the rules? What guarantees are there that we can control what it is? And all these things. And he could not answer it. His comment to me ended up being, Congress will never do it. It'll just scare Congress, and they'll never do it because they don't want to lose control. And the way I take it is this. What we're being asked to do is play chicken. I don't know whether, you know what playing chicken is. It's, two cars heading towards each other 100 miles an hour and see who's going to swerve. They're asking us to play chicken with the Constitution. And I contend this is there's really nothing wrong with the Constitution. We just have to start living by it. Because to be able to have a balanced budget, the power already exists in the Congress to be able to have a balanced budget. The power already exists in Congress to be able to have term limits if they want. Okay? So there's no reason to actually have an Article 5 convention. And the problem with it is there's a potential that once one is called, if it is, they could actually completely destroy and rewrite our Constitution. First Amendment goes away. Second Amendment goes away. Your whole Bills of Rights go away. There's a very high possibility. It is not a good thing, and I don't care what anybody tells you that it's good. I firmly believe that it is not a good thing. So I would encourage you to actually get on your phone tonight and your email tonight, get a hold of your legislators and tell them to vote no. And they may be voting as early as tomorrow on it. So this is an urgent thing that came up, and we need to pay attention to it. Okay, so I'll get off on that one. Okay, you have a question? Come up to the microphone, if you could, so that people that are here, I'll just let you use this.
Yeah. My question is, it takes 2/3 of the states,
yes.
and right now, there's 17 states that have adopted, I believe.
Actually, there are. Actually, I heard today that there are 17 states that have rescinded theirs, and that they're actually within 1 or 2 states of actually hitting that 2/3. And if Idaho gets on board with it, that might be just enough to make it happen. To make the 2/3. Okay, so it's important. It's important. We need to pay attention. So on that, call your legislators, write them, and everything. Tell them to vote no, and that is HCR 23 and HCR 25. Okay. Next week is going to be a little bit of an interesting week. We're going to have some guys zooming in on us, and we're going to talk about Sharia law. And do we understand what that? Does anybody know what that is? It's actually a law that it's a Muslim law, I believe, and I don't know a lot about it myself, but it is actually a lot in conflict with our Constitution, and there has been some efforts across the country to invoke Sharia law in communities and in cases rather than the Constitution, rather than American law. And they say, comments are saying that, our culture, we're from Afghanistan, we're like this and everything, and we would like to be, we would like our laws to apply to us. And an example I was told about just the other day, and I'm just learning about this, was if a couple wants to get divorced, under Sharia law, the man only has to say in public, basically, that he wants to have a divorce. And he ends up being, and then that's enough. But the thing for him to actually be divorced, the thing, though, is the women under Sharia law are, in my words, considered property. And so they have no rights. They have nothing. They don't have any, they don't have any custody. There's no custody battle over kids or anything. The women just are left out completely. So Sharia law is an issue. And we're going to have 3 guys coming. One is Christopher Holton, an attorney Stephen Galley, and a Colonel Paul Deckert. He's an attorney also, and they're from the Center for Security Policy. And they're going to talk about Sharia law, civilization, jihad, and the threat to the Constitution. They've been working this for many years, and they've seen things going on across the country, and how it is affecting certain things across the country, and how Idaho needs to be paying attention. And I'll just say this, Idaho, it's a great state, but to think we're immune from what's going on across the country, we're not. And it's naive for us to think that we are. So we need to learn all we can about what's going on. what's going on in the country, what's going on in the world, because I guarantee it's going to affect us. Idaho is one of the fastest growing states in the nation right now. And some people are leaving, are running away from a bad place to potentially a better place, and some people are running to a better place to try to make it a bad place. And we need to realize that that's a fact. So anyway, next week is going to be very, very interesting. So again, is Sharia law, should Idaho be concerned about Sharia law? The resounding yes. Okay, so come and listen to that. Okay, well, tonight we actually came, we have a gentleman, he's from Lewiston. His name's Josh Roy. He decided he wanted to take a shot at being a U.S. congressman. And our U.S. senator, excuse me, okay? And let's give him a big hand for that. You know, that takes a lot of effort and a lot of courage and all that. And so I'm actually going to turn it over to Josh. Let him come up here. And as I tell to everybody, Josh, what we're going to do is we're going to let you tell us why you're wonderful and why we ought to be voting for you. Okay? And then we're going to set up and we're going to ask you the tough questions. Okay? All right. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to give this to Josh. If you're going to come up and ask a question, please come up here so that we're recording and live streaming this so that the people watching can understand the question. So let's give Josh another big hand. Thank you, Josh.
Well, thank you, Stand Up for Idaho, for coming. It's an honor to be here, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk to you. So I'm running for U.S. Senate against Jim Risch, the incumbent. I'm a middle-class, working father of 4. My wife and I have 4 children, ages 9 to 17, and we're running this campaign together in our spare time, and it's been crazy. Believe me, it's been crazy. I'm trying to use 2 weeks of vacation on the primary so that I save a week in case I lose to have fun over the summer. So today I'm going to share about myself and my family and my campaign platform. My platform rests on family values, term limits, and fighting the crazy bureaucracy in our country. I'll also take a few minutes to address key points of the Republican Party platform to make sure that voters know where I stand and are comfortable with who I am. So I grew up in rural South Idaho in Arco, which sadly has shrunk to about 900 people since I left. And growing up, coming here to Idaho Falls was sort of the big event of my childhood for many years. I've ridden across the desert in the back of a pickup truck more times than I can count. So my father, John Roy, he was a ranch hand and a farm hand until I was 6. And then he was a late graduate of engineering school, graduating when he was 32. So growing up with the family, got a really big exposure to ranching and farming in my childhood, and then growing up in a rural community after that. He started at the Savannah River site, which probably many of you are familiar with, out of college, and then ended up at what was then called INEL in the early 1990s, and he worked out the majority of his career at Test Area North. And we used to occasionally pick him up in the parking lot there at that big airplane hangar, which is really quite the airplane hangar. So details on his work career were always pretty scant. I understood he did some work processing radioactive waste and something or other with his tank armor. Also, in a display of government efficiency, he once strung 300 yards of garden hose from one building to the next to get a bathroom running. So, as his career wound down, he purchased a small farm near Moscow, Idaho, in the north part of the state, and he retired to there around 2006 and farmed until his death last summer. So if any of you here knew him, there's a chance. He retired in 2006. Please look me up afterwards. I'll chat with you. I'd love to meet some of my dad's coworkers. So my father was a lifelong proponent of nuclear power, and I nearly pursued the industry myself. Just from growing up with an engineer with a passion for the nuclear industry, I absorbed a great deal of knowledge ancillary to the industry and how it ran and how reactors worked and all kinds of interesting stuff like that. I attended the University of Idaho from 2000 to 2004 and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in mechanical engineering. My wife, Jessica, grew up on a ranch near Arco, and we met through 4-H. And she attended the College of Southern Idaho in Twin Falls and became a nurse. We married in 2003 and had 4 kids. During and after college, I worked briefly engineering for a sawmill before moving to Western Washington to work in a pulp and paper mill. And I worked over there till 2018, and then Western Washington gradually became a much less pleasant place to raise children and have a family. And I came back to Idaho in 2018 to work at the Clearwater Paper Facility in Lewiston. So my career in pulp and paper making as an engineer has become key to my campaign. Paper mills are virtually the last stand of traditional heavy manufacturing in the United States. The machines are enormous, often as large as, like, say, an aircraft carrier. And the facilities are usually larger than a square mile. My current facility is about a mile wide and 3 miles long. And we have 5 boilers, multiple turbines, complete sewage water treatment system. We process 40 million gallons a day of sewage. And there's a highly sophisticated centralized computer control system to run the facility. We process out 1,800 tons per day of finished paperboard. So steel ore and aluminum, those can be shipped easily globally. Wood chips cannot be shipped. So whereas most of your metal smelting and other heavy manufacturing activities were outsourced over the last 30 years, wood chips have a very low bulk density, so you have to mostly make the paper within 400 or so miles of wherever you get the wood chips at. So this shipping problem saved many pulp and paper mills from closure. Aluminum lost 20 out of 23 smelters in this country between 2000 and 2010. Our steel production per capita has been collapsing for the last 50 years. Everybody knows that. We followed that politically pretty closely. And so pulp and paper has ended up being one of the last repositories of heavy manufacturing know-how in the U.S. And I was a first-hand witness to deindustrialization over the last 25 years. I worked on the coast of Washington, and I had a front row seat to the closure of 9 mills, which was close to half the facilities in western Oregon and western Washington. And you watch the towns are just destroyed. A town of 10,000 people will lose a job that employs, 1,000 people or 500 people. I've watched the industries that fed a generation, 2, 3 generations, 5 generations of Americans leveled to the ground and recycled, right, or shipped to China, actually. So reindustrializing America has become key to my life purpose and my campaign. So I'm running on a platform of family values, term limits, fighting government bureaucracy, and reindustrializing our country. So my wife and I, we are the original family values candidates. We are lifelong people of faith. We homeschooled for many years. Many times we have struggled to know how to raise children in this modern world of ours. I know that's a struggle that probably many of you have shared over time with my wife and I. Our children need protected. They need trained in our values, our culture, and our faith. And we must fight to protect our families at all costs. And this is the first and most important step in rebuilding our country, is rebuilding our families. Somehow we have to find a way to come alongside our communities, our churches, our schools, and our teachers to turn our children into the men and women we need them to be. So what's Congress's role in this? What am I going to do when I get there? So I believe Congress has a role to play fighting critical race theory, gender ideology, and other inappropriate racial and sexual and political content in our schools. I believe Congress has many roles in fighting for our family. I'm going to give you an interesting example that all of you will understand, because all of you have lived experiences with this, either with yourselves or with your grandkids. So what should Congress do? What should I do? So for one answer, we need to look at the success of Trump and Robert F. Kennedy with nutrition and understand that much of the leadership Kennedy and Trump are exercising should probably be exercised with Congress through laws. So ponder this example and the wider application and the implications of what I'm saying here. So Think about his food initiative and the creative forcefulness Trump has brought to this discussion around how we feed America. Okay, so Captain Crunch breakfast cereal. It's basically the worst thing you can feed your kids. Okay. It's candy, right? And we all know that, right? Okay. So what kind of corporate executive would advertise Captain Crunch to children? You ever stop and ask about what's going on inside that guy's head, right? It is legitimately morally reprehensible to advertise those products to children. So next time you're shopping and your 4-year-old or your grandkid acts out in the grocery store and you are there being publicly shamed and judged for the poor behavior of your child, right? Remember and take solace in knowing that someone very, very wealthy deliberately spent money to set that situation up. Right? It's no joke, right? They thought about it and they did it. Okay? Now, you will always be responsible for the choices you make as a parent or grandparent, but you need to take strength in knowing what you're really fighting. It's not just a fight for self-control of your child or for family discipline or for your values. You're fighting a multi-billion-dollar corporation every single time you turn around. Okay? We must understand this mercenary profit-at-any-cost approach to business, and we have to fight back legislatively if necessary. Now, this example is easy to relate to. I would challenge that there's probably not a single person here who hasn't tried to deal with that example in their own life, right? The fight for Idaho's families, I'll be focused on detailed legislation protecting children and families. Issues such as the extreme danger of highly developed advertising to children and social media to teens are issues that the federal government should be actively engaged in. At the same time, and as often as possible and everywhere I can, I will drive legislation that first and foremost recognizes that the federal government cannot do everything. I believe that when Congress can no longer regulate effectively, it should return power to the states and not to executive agencies. And schools in particular should be under state control. Right? Now, my second issue is term limits. So, if I am blessed enough to be elected and reelected, I pledge to serve no more than 3 terms in the Senate, and I put that in writing. My main opponent in this race is 83 years old. When he starts his next term, and he will be nearly 90 when he finishes. Congress is not a golden parachute job position. And there's a widespread recognition that our leaders have become out of touch, that they have been away from real life for too long. And I and many voters like me feel that congressional service should be roughly limited to a length and retirement age similar to a normal working career. Now, last week, a bill was introduced in the Idaho State Legislature calling for Congress to begin the process of amending the Constitution to impose term limits for U.S. senators and representatives. This bill should be understood for what it is. It is a plea to our leaders to take action. The bill, as written and as laid out by Dorothy Moon very carefully, is a very risky bill. And we would be much better off as a nation if it was Congress that acted on term limits, not a convention of the states. And many of the concerns about that are very valid concerns that we need to pay attention to. So in my job, like in most jobs, the age of 82 actually, these ages are far past viability professionally. In the real world, leaders at these ages are not capable. And we wonder at the struggles of Congress. But few of us are asking the hard questions. We all watched Joe Biden. We watched him on the debate stage. We watched Nancy Pelosi. We watched Dianna Feinstein. Right? We all saw plainly that Biden and Feinstein weren't in charge of their offices. My main opponent will be 83 when he starts his next term, and 90 when he finishes, nearly 90. He's been in elected office since Nixon. Okay? I pledge to serve no more than 3 terms, at which point I'll be 63 and appropriately aged to retire. I pledge to facilitate a competitive election process for my successor, and I pledge to mentor and advise that successor. Elections are competitive, and they can easily become very rancorous. However, I do believe my competitor is a good man, and I would wish that when this is finished, if I am blessed to win, that he would be willing to mentor and advise me and pass on the wisdom he has learned from his years in service. My run is a direct challenge to the system. This is the simple, direct courage necessary to force change in our nation. I am not blind to the fact that there are many talented leaders in Boise whose careers are hostage to a system that refuses their advancement. As an outsider, I am challenging the system on their behalf. If we want term limits, then it makes sense to elect someone who openly pledges to support term limits and pledges to self-impose them. My third issue is fighting federal bureaucracy. Executive bureaucracy and regulation are destroying our economy. Executive agencies don't go through the painful legislative process. This process is very necessary. It's how we find the compromises we need. Executive agencies can't be voted out of office, they can't be called, and they can't be influenced. This is why we can't afford our trucks, houses, groceries, and insurance. If Congress can't write legislation itself, it should delegate it back to the states, not to an agency. I'm going to illustrate this with 2 examples. So, my first example comes from a recent editorial in the Wall Street Journal discussing the rising costs of city water and sewage services. So, since the mid-1980s, the cost of water and sewage service has doubled, accounting for inflation. After inflation, the price of city water and sewage has doubled since 1985. Okay? This is entirely due to EPA regulations. It is in no way the EPA's business to regulate city services like water and sewer. This belongs to the states. My second example is a little boring, and it comes from my engineering background, so follow me because it applies to every area of the economy. So out there in the parking lot, somewhere, there's an F-250 or a Dodge Ram or a Chevy Silverado, a really nice new one, right? And it's not mine. I can't afford a new one, sorry. So a new work truck is about $60,000 to $80,000, maybe $100,000 okay? And in your mind, I want you to take that new shiny truck apart, and I want you to put it into 2 piles, right? In one pile, I want every component on that truck that was present on a pickup truck prior to 1990. In the other pile, I want every component that's been added by regulation since 1990. Now, the value of that second pile will be about 50% of the value of your vehicle. The core function of your vehicle is less than half the value of your vehicle. Now, this holds true across the vehicle market, right? The average car purchased is about $50,000. It's about $50,200 and something, I think. And about $25,000 of that purchase of the average new car is regulatory requirement since 1990. Okay? We bought 16 million vehicles in 2024. That's $400 billion. If you add the interest on the 7-year, $750 a month loans, it's almost $500 billion in additional spending. That spending, I might remind you, goes to China. And if you don't realize that, remember the articles last week on airbags that are killing people. They all originated in China. You can't make that technology in the States at a price anybody can afford. Right? So this example is true across all industries, right? Lumber mills can't make lumber because of this, right? Loggers can't log, builders can't build, farmers can't farm. Anybody try to buy a new tractor lately? They're pushing $500,000, right? In the 1980s, the inflation-adjusted price was about $230 for a similar tractor, right? Nuclear power plants can't be constructed or operated, right? Hospitals can't care for patients. We can't afford for every product, every service, and every energy source in our country to be double the price. Okay? So this brings me to my 4th platform point. We live in a country that struggles to farm, to make steel, aluminum, or copper. We can't mine. We can't make ships. We can't make microchips. We can't make a hand drill. We can't even make a single tablet of ibuprofen. Next time you go to the drugstore, go stand there and stare at that bottle of ibuprofen. You can't make that in America. Okay? We need farmers, manufacturers, and skilled trades back in business. This struggle is largely regulatory. We need regulations right-sized and taxes under control. Donald Trump has made reindustrialization a key part of his mission. He recognizes, as do many of us, that if you can't make steel, aluminum, copper, or microchips, then you can't make cars, airplanes, electric motors, or computers. If you can't make cars, airplanes, electric motors, or computers, then you can't fight, let alone win, a war. I recently toured a high-end manufacturer of firearms in Lewiston. One of the owner-managers was discussing regulation. His answer for the government was simple: get out of the way. He related being approached by a community development agency asking what they could do to help his business. His response was, get out of the way. Okay? When a company needs to build a new building, get out of the way. Let them build a building, right? Our businesses and industries don't need subsidies. They need regulations that's right-sized. So I've addressed 4 of my main campaign platform issues: family values, term limits, killing bureaucracy, and industrial policy. Now I want to take a few moments to discuss the Republican Party platform. I support this platform completely, and I support legislation that promotes it. Donald Trump is a brilliant leader and probably the most transformational president since Lincoln. There is no doubt that he has learned his place in history and will be known for centuries to come. Under his leadership, many aspects of the party platform have been improved, and I support him in his full throttle effort to improve our country. Under his leadership, our great nation is unapologetically fighting to reverse the decline of recent years and to rise to the challenge of a new era. We must seal our border to end illegal immigration and the inflow of fentanyl and other drugs. We must fight inflation and rebuild manufacturing by right-sizing the regulatory system of the federal government, returning governance to the states to improve efficiency and responsiveness. As my discussion on city water and sewage prices and truck prices showed, regulations have an enormous impact on inflation. These regulations directly double the cost of many goods. The follow-through impact on other goods and services is strongly felt. Another example of inflation is the price of beef. Currently, just 4 companies control 85% of American beef processing capacity. The largest, JBS, is Brazilian-owned. Is it any surprise, then, that beef prices are at all-time highs and herd sizes are at all-time lows? Like many other areas of the economy, federal regulations drove small processors out of business. There is no practical reason that a local meat packing plant or a local butcher can't supply the needs of local restaurants and grocery stores without federal oversight. Do you really think that the framers intended for a federal officer to be required to sell a steak? The state of Idaho can regulate businesses just fine. It makes no sense for a cow to be shipped multiple states away just to be processed and shipped back by Cisco. We must recognize that our own government bureaucrats have caused most of our inflation, and our system and culture has encouraged us and our government to borrow to compensate for the difference. We must restore America's energy production. We must pursue the development of the next generation of commercial nuclear power sources and turbocharge research and development of cutting-edge nuclear technology. We must defend our Constitution, one of the greatest documents in human history. We must fight for the Bill of Rights, our freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. I support the Suppressor Freedom Act. We must restore our military. Only those who are prepared for war will have peace. Our nation must be an impregnable fortress, hardened against the latest generations of hypersonic missiles and cyber weapons, and these defenses must be made by our own citizens. The weaponization of the government against the people must cease. Our streets must be safe and effectively policed, crushing drug cartels, violent gangs, and locking up violent criminals. Our great cities must be rebuilt to be beautiful, safe places where families can flourish. The sanctity of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency must be protected and strengthened. Social Security and Medicare must be defended to protect our elderly. The onerous regulations on our motor vehicles must end, particularly in a large rural state like Idaho that depends on farmers, ranchers, and loggers. We must have cost-effective vehicles. All forms of critical race theory, gender ideology, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, and political content must be removed from our schools. Our teachers in schools are good, upright people and institutions who need our help restoring our nation. Men do not belong in women's restrooms or sports. Radicals must leave our college campuses. Our college campuses must be safe, patriotic, and effective. Our elections must be secure. We must have voter ID, paper ballots, and proof of citizenship. I support the SAVE Act. I do not believe that voter ID causes any form of voter disenfranchisement. The idea that voter ID requirements cause disenfranchisement is a straw horse. That was true 5 generations ago. It is no longer true today. In closing, there are a few things I want to address about my candidacy. Many of you have never heard of me before. I'm a political unknown, and you should have good reason to be cautious about me. Here is how I became a candidate. On Sunday, November 9th, I read an article in the paper about upcoming Senate hearings on vehicle prices. This interests me, as you may have gathered. When I got to work on the 10th, I took a few minutes to write my senator about the hearings. After writing him, I became curious about when he was next up for re-election. In short order, I learned that he had a primary in May, was functionally unopposed, was going to be 83 before Election Day, and planned to serve until he was nearly 90. I was shocked. I have always supported my senator, and I believe he is a good man. However, we all watched Joe Biden's debate and watched the final years of Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein. I surmised correctly, I later learned, that there were internal party reasons that no competent successor had been put forward, and I was deeply, gutturally bothered by this. I had honestly expected a more proactive approach to leaders in the state, leaders that I have held and continue to hold in very high regard. It took me a week to figure out that a normal middle-class guy could launch a campaign. I am not rich. I work for a living. I have to be back at work Monday. I read piles of regulation on campaign finance. I had a bank account in 7 days. I was registered with the Federal Election Commission by the day after Thanksgiving. And I went live on Facebook on December 9th. Since that time, I have campaigned as furiously as a working husband and father of 4 is able. I also wish to address my inexperience as an elected official. 2 of our current greatest leaders had no prior political experience. Donald Trump had no political experience. Yet he has easily been the most impactful president since Lincoln. Like me, his experience was from the business world, and with it, he has revitalized our nation. J.D. Vance also had no political experience. He, too, came from the world of business. He served just 2 years as a freshman senator before advancing to the vice presidency. Like Vance, I am a fresh connection to the next generation of leaders. We need someone who is not a career politician, who has an outsider's perspective and a fresh take on our nation's problems. Someone who has no political baggage and owes no favors. My experience in industry will be invaluable to our federal government, which has been tasked with the fate of rebuilding our nation. I am uniquely suited to the time ahead of us. I spent my working career in traditional heavy manufacturing and the timber industry. I have a family background in farming and nuclear energy. There aren't many working-age Americans left with heavy manufacturing experience. Most sawmills, farms, aluminum smelters, steel mills, and mines have closed. In the Senate, I would be the only leader with true heavy manufacturing experience. I can be comfortable in virtually any agriculture or manufacturing setting. I have an MBA and 20 years political experience in some of the most intensive political environments around. If you don't believe me, go watch documentaries about steel mills. I'm here today looking for the support of the conservatives of this community to help drive my campaign. I need donations and support of every type. So thank you all for your time. Do I have questions I can answer? I appreciate the vote of confidence.
So this is a financial question. Last year, Risch voted to raise the national debt by $4 trillion. It was one of his biggest fiascos. What would you vote for if they told you you had to raise the national debt by $4 trillion?
Well, it's no joke that running a budget at the federal level is a big deal. And if we as Americans don't deal with the fact that we have to keep our country functioning and running, and we have to figure out how to pay our bills, then we're going to keep borrowing money. First thing we got to do is we have to cut spending. Second thing we have to do is we have to grow our economy. I've been over the financial analysis behind how do we pay for the things we've committed to. There is no way to pay for the things we've committed to. Everybody's afraid to cut spending. If I stand here with a straight face and tell you I won't raise the borrowing limit, I can't, because I already know I'm going to have to. I'm an honest man, right? The only way out of this situation is to grow the economy. The only way to grow the economy is to change regulations and get people back to work with a regulatory environment that's profitable for U.S. companies. That's what we have to do.
So what does success look like to you after one full term?
So one of my beliefs is that part of the problem with Congress is that they are passing laws that leave the details to regulatory agencies. And, I work in the real world, right? And we have to somehow own the fact that becoming a congressman probably should be becoming a person with one of the most boring jobs on the planet. Because the legislation coming out of Congress needs to become much, much more specific. And if we should not be giving the operable management of this country over to executive agencies to write the rules. In most cases, the rule writing, if Congress can't write the rules in most cases, that should come back to the states, right? The act of writing these rules that govern our country should always be done to every extent possible by people who are accountable to voters, right? So success for me is going to be 6 very boring years of long hours wrangling about the minutia of regulation rather than, whenever possible, giving it over to agencies.
Since I'm up here messing around with the microphone. A couple years ago, the Democrats tried to overturn the filibuster in the Senate. I heard all kinds of pundits panicking that if they do that, it's going to be the end of the country. And now many of those same pundits are saying the Republicans ought to overturn the filibuster before the Democrats get back in power and do it anyways. What are your thoughts on the filibuster?
I'm going to give you thoughts, not an answer. So the filibuster is a gentleman's agreement to try and maintain decorum in what is arguably the most powerful elected body in the world. Now, one of the issues we have is if the Senate's floating back and forth between 49 and 51 votes, either party, and in a peer democracy, then either party can change the entire country at the drop of a hat if they have momentary power. Right? The filibuster was an effort to put a gentleman's agreement in place to stabilize those relationships. It's been overturned, I think, first by the Democrats for judicial nominations, and then I think the Republicans continued that tradition. And there's arguably considerable hesitancy about overturning the filibuster. From a strategy standpoint, we are probably wisest to not overturn it. If we were to overturn it, it should only be overturned for things of very significant weight, and they should be things that cannot be changed after the next Senate is elected. And that's a very narrow definition of things you would ever consider overturning the filibuster for. There's not many laws Congress can pass that can't be reversed, but there are a couple. And we all run the risk that the men and women who come after us on the other side of the political aisle would take advantage of the overturn of the filibuster. And there's a question of how much of an agreement that is between two opposing sides to maintain decorum.
I got a couple questions, and actually get down to personal bit because everybody does all good things when they're campaigning, but when they get into office, they sort of change. And so, just a couple of questions. Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been sued? What skeletons do you have in your closet that could potentially be used against you?
Well, Debbie can tell you all my skeletons. I've never been arrested. I've never been sued. I've never gone bankrupt. I once had a late payment for $300, missed a medical bill. I fixed that. Killed my credit history for like 2 years though. Right. I have no skeletons in my closet, no DUIs, no drug use. My family was a bit unusual, but that's par for the course. I have a sister who struggled with drug addiction and ultimately passed away from it. That's probably the extent of my family history that you could dig up for dirt. I had to create a Facebook account to run this campaign.
My name is Ernie Tate. I've had the pleasure of knowing Josh. I'm a little short, so that's thank you. Yeah. Anyway, I talked to Josh the other day. I had no idea he was running for Senate until about 4 or 5 days ago. And I talked to him on the phone. I actually known him for many, many years and haven't talked to him for 15. But in our conversation, I said, so what is your platform? What are you running on? And he said one of the things is term limits. And being a simple person myself, I told him, I said, well, term limits is not going to get you elected, Josh. However, I think I was wrong, and in my subsequent discussions with Josh since then, he's convinced me that term limits in this case, in this election, running against Jim Risch, which I have voted for Jim Risch ever since he's been in the Senate. And it's pointed out at the fact that the man will be 83 before he's before this coming election in May 19th. After watching what this nation has went through and the results that we're seeing of Joe Biden and his term as president and what has happened to an aged man, my question is, and it's my understanding, relying on memory, talking to Janice McGeehan several years ago when she was running for governor, that there's a small group of people in Boise that actually control what happens in the state politics. And my wife tonight brought up a subject that a man that's 83 years old, what is the plan when in 2 or 3 years Jim Risch decides that he's earned the rest? When he does stop, take the rest, and it's left up to the state to appoint somebody to replace him. And I think it's probably my thoughts about what we went through with Joe Biden is no different than I'm sure what most of the people in Idaho would look at and say, okay, and especially the politicians. I'm sure where that right now that it's like Josh pointed out earlier that there's not a ton of talented people, and in a conversation earlier with Josh, he stressed the term honorable. And when it comes to an honorable person, Josh ranks number one in my opinion of an honorable person. But why aren't they running, and who do these people have in mind to replace Jim Risch with, should he decide at his advanced age not to? So I think the term limits is a much bigger issue in this election than what a lot of people give it credit for. And I would like to have Josh expand just a little bit along those, if he has any thoughts, and reiterate why in this election that term limits is a big issue, not only for Idaho but for the entire nation.
Yeah, thank you, Ernie. My opinion, this is strictly my opinion, is that right now Idaho voters should be seeing an election with 3 or 4 honorable candidates vying for this position, and that none of those candidates should be Jim Risch. That's my opinion, right? I'm not blind, like I stated earlier, to the fact that there are several, at least, competent men in Boise who should be running in this election, right? And that there are reasons they are not. And I am challenging those reasons. But, you know, it is not a good thing that you as voters have Jim Risch on the ballot overshadowing all the other candidates. It is not a good thing that the only viable candidate besides Jim Risch is me, right? And our system has led to that condition. And I'm here to challenge a system that has led to that.
I'm Doyle Beck. I got one probably big question. I mean, obviously, I agree with a lot of what you say, and you've admitted that you're kind of an unknown. In fact, the guy that just divulged to us, the guy that's known you for a long time, didn't even know you were running. And Jim Risch is obviously, I agree, I think he should have been replaced quite a while ago. But he's a past lieutenant governor. He's a past leader in the Senate. He's a past governor. He's been in the U.S. Senate. He's got name recognition. What is your plan? I mean, you got to, there's no question. You even admitted you're the underdog. Okay, in order to pull this off, you've got to have some kind of a rabbit in a hat. What is your plan to make this happen, to be successful?
You're my plan. No.
Well,
Grassroots.
I'm one vote, and I'm limited on what I can do.
Social media is the only practical answer, right? I'm a working father of 4, right? And I recognized a situation that someone had to get involved in, right? The only effective way to communicate across the state at this magnitude is social media. And I'm looking for people to help. I need donations, I need support, and I need muscle.
Well, you've already told us that you just opened your first Facebook.
Yep, absolutely.
So where are you going to get the talent for social media, and what's it going to cost?
I hired the talent for social media 2 weeks ago. And because it's quite difficult to run a federal level campaign on social media. There are tricks to that that require professional level talent to do that. And to make that work, the state has to know who I am. The main avenue for that is Facebook. To a lesser extent, it's going to be X, depending on the demographic you're communicating with, or Instagram, right? There are a couple other channels, such as YouTube. It doesn't have quite the reach that Facebook has from top to bottom of the market spectrum, from advertising through sales. But that's my plan.
Okay, and what part of your plan is going to help you overcome the Trump endorsement?
You know, we all know that Trump's endorsement of Jim Risch was a standard endorsement, right? And I don't think there's any changing that fact. Trump endorsed Jim Risch for this election last May, I think. It was at least 6-8 months ago, right? In fact, I was at the Republican winter meeting where Jim Risch read the endorsement out loud verbatim. So it's quite an interesting speech. the citizens of Idaho do have to make a decision. They are going to be presented with a choice. I am presenting them with a choice. I am presenting you with a choice. They're going to get to make that choice. It's up to them.
Okay, do you have a budget on social media you think it would take to obtain the Senate, U.S. Senate seat?
I don't think you'd obtain the U.S. Senate seat for less than $1 million. And that's probably on the low side. Most of the estimates I've heard are more like 3.
Okay. All righty, thank you.
Hey, you want to ask how much money I got?
For what?
You want to ask how much money I got?
Uh,
You can, go ahead.
Okay, let's say, what's your plan to raise that $2 million?
You are.
I can give you my wallet, but you're not going to get $2 million out of it.
Yeah. I need $20 from a lot of people. That's what I need.
Okay, do you have enough time between now and May to make that happen?
You know, I still have to work. And that's the bottom line. I'm a working man. And I'm going to be running social media. I've been staying up late and getting up early. But I do work 60 hours a week. I'm in a heavy industrial setting. I am down there every morning before 7. I'm there till after 5:30 most nights. I'm on call about every 6th weekend of the month, or every 6th weekend in a row, right? And I'm responsible for around-the-clock staffing for a production facility. Yes, it's going to be a social media campaign.
Okay, I would tell you that the only probably difference that I would have with what you said tonight is the sugar cereal.
Oh, yes. What's your opinion on that? I'm very curious.
Well, my opinion is if it was up to my spending, they would be broke.
You and me both.
Okay, and people I don't think understand it. I think rather than try regulations, the government ought to be in a position of maybe advertising, here are the diseases that come from sugar. Now have all you want, but here's this is what you're going to deal with, and let them decide.
No. There are. That's a very valid point. I've pondered that both ways. My opinion on what you're saying has changed somewhat since getting an MBA and taking classes in marketing. And we fail to understand the psychology behind good marketing. And we fail to understand what companies are doing to manipulate us. It's extremely sophisticated. If you take a person, a young person, a child, a young adult, and you put the full weight of the best psychologists that can be purchased on the planet, focused singularly on those young adults, with the data available through social media, they know when you pee, right? We know that, okay? There is no psychology that won't crumble under that assault. I'm not special. I have struggled doom scrolling, okay? And most people would consider me abnormally self-controlled. Can you imagine what that kind of system does to a child? Now, who takes on that kind of power, right? My family virtually cut off all social media. That's why I didn't have a Facebook account. And but it's a very valid question of we'll look at the rise in suicides among young women when they put cameras on the front of the smartphones, on the screen side of the smartphones. Clearly documented. The companies knew within 6 months they were killing people through putting cameras on the screen side of smartphones. There's no joke about it. But they made a fortune off that. So where is the line? Well, so that comes back to the legislative process. So when you put 10 or 20 people who are elected in a room, who are accountable to voters, and they sit down and they argue about it, they find an answer. It's seldom a perfect answer, just as my answer to you is not perfect right now. But it is an answer that does the best to find a path through the needs of the different people involved. And it's remarkably successful when you use it. There's a reason why America has the most dynamic economy on the globe.
Yeah, I think that primarily relies on freedom.
Yes,
Is why we
absolutely.
have, okay. And I mean, I'm not an expert in it by no means, but I don't know why you couldn't employ the same tactics that the suppliers employ for an anti-sugar campaign to get people to understand what they're dealing with.
You probably could, yeah. I don't know how well it'll work. I know it's been tried a couple of times. We've seen seatbelt ads, we've seen all that stuff. It's been tried. I do remember, though, that these corporations are worth $1 trillion, and they're selling their products for a great deal of money, and most of it goes to advertising. You're not talking about an advertising campaign worth $30 million. You're talking about an advertising campaign worth $50 billion, right?
What does it cost to make a regulation and then follow through and enforce it?
Well, I'd rather see the states regulating it. I only think the federal government should regulate cross-border issues, and
I don't really argue with that. I just know we're not released to our potential because we're hampered so much by government.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you listen to me talk about pickup trucks right now,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and it's no joke. I studied automotive engineering in college. I was a member of the Society of Automotive Engineers for many years. Assisted steering, you could fly an Apollo mission on an assisted steering system. It's a very, very, very expensive system.
Okay. All righty. Thank you.
You're welcome.
How do we get ourselves out of the box that we've painted ourselves in with sanctuary cities? How do we get ourselves out of the box we've painted ourselves in with sanctuary cities in this country? Thank you.
Yeah, so, you have this problem that we are a nation of assembled states, and not all the states agree with each other. The first thing with sanctuary cities is federal law enforcement on immigration is paramount. By constitutional right, the federal government controls immigration policy and international trade and anything that crosses state lines, right? And so a local government that chooses not to engage with federal authority on immigration, what's happened in Minneapolis, for instance, which I know is forefront on everybody's mind, is very, very sad. I feel for those agents. I feel for those officers. I feel for the people being arrested. And what we have to recognize in watching Minneapolis is that we're watching a play for the midterm elections coming up this fall, right? That's really what this is about. It's about publicity for the midterm elections. I don't think we have a choice. We must enforce immigration law. And in cities like Minneapolis, it's going to be very unpleasant. Authorities could probably be more tactful in some cases. And I don't see these sanctuary cities being an easy solution because we're dealing with a large population of people who don't agree with another large population of people. And we're dealing with people who are willing to be violent in their opposition. And I think this is going to be a growing journey for our country, and I think it's going to hurt. And I wish it was different. That an answer? It's sort of an answer.
My name's Jared Tate. I've also known Josh for over 20 years. In fact, I actually think he babysat me once or twice. If I remember right.
Probably so, yeah.
Yeah. Great man, upstanding character. The question, if there's any dirt or skeletons, I've known him since I was a little kid and you were a teenager, and I would bet money there's none. So when it comes to somebody that's straight up upstanding for the job, he's the guy. But my question for you would be two questions. First and foremost, what is your definition of America first? And I say that in the context, I'm 38 years old, And I would say probably 7 out of every 10 friends that I have across the country who voted for Trump, who are conservatives, are totally just beat down and have lost faith in MAGA because it seems like it's turned into MIGA or, Israel first, just straight gun to the punch. So when it comes to America first, how would you define it, and what would be your stance on foreign intervention, like with the Iran situation, Venezuela? And then my final question is AI. What are your thoughts on AI? I've been a coder for over 20 years, and my job has basically been eliminated in the last 6 months. I haven't written a line of code in almost a year. It's coming for everybody's jobs. If you sit in front of a computer and you do work, we're to the point, as of this last week, your job could probably be automated. So those 2 things, those are my 2 questions.
Okay, so let's tackle the easy one first. We'll talk about foreign intervention, right? So however you want to interpret Trump's communication skills, he has effectively put Europe on the hook for European defense. He is the first president to accomplish that in over 50 years. And that is a remarkable accomplishment, one that I would not have ever thought could be done. Now, it's certainly been an interesting series of press conferences and behind closed doors conflicts, and it's been fascinating to watch. But Venezuela is a perfect example of what's probably effective foreign intervention. We aren't trying to run the country. We didn't try to pretend that we could go there and change them into a democracy if they didn't want to be a democracy. All we did was reinforce the Don Roe doctrine that we don't need China and Russia setting up bases in Central America, right? And that's what this is all about. That's really what this is all about, right? It's what it's always been about. And America effectively ended most of China and Russia's influence in Central America in one weekend and returned the Western Hemisphere to our control. The same time that that happened, the Europeans have essentially taken over their own defense. And we still have a lot of assets and resources, and I don't think there's any doubt that America would come to Europe's aid at the drop of a hat. But the Europeans are rearming at a furious pace and taking responsibility for their own continent. And that was the main complaint. Why are American boots and American lives at risk when the Germans work a 28-hour work week? It's a valid question. I don't get 3 months a year of vacation. I work twice the average yearly hours of your typical German. How do you think I feel about American boots on the ground over there? So, I think Donald Trump has solved most of the foreign intervention problems. We virtually annihilated the Iranian nuclear program, didn't put a single boot in the ground. And to your point about Israel, the Iranian nuclear program, easily one of the most dangerous programs on the planet of its type, was taken out largely by the Israelis. They're a very handy group of people to have around. They're incredibly deadly. They probably have one of the world's top 10 militaries. They might be in the top 5. They're nuclear armed. They're sitting on a quarter of the world's oil. They have a pro-Western government. They're about everything you could ask for to stabilize the Middle East. And they're very, very dangerous. And they should be respected regardless of the political viewpoint on their role in American politics or their role in American religion. They should be respected as a very capable ally and a very dangerous person that you want on your side. Let's see, AI. Yes, AI. So something that's occupied my mind considerably for the last year. Also, although my job has been less impacted than yours has. I am also afraid of AI. My job is a little harder to outsource to AI, but I see AI coming for my job within 10 years or within 5. It could be faster than I realize. I am deeply concerned about the loss of cognitive capabilities of mankind. I mean, you know, when you surrender the ability to do the mathematics to, for instance, choose what diameter a pipe should be as a race, as a species, if you surrender that ability, you may never get that back. And it does bother me. The one thing that I've come to as an ironclad conclusion on AI is that our personal privacy is probably the thing that we should start defending before anything else. We all fear being called Luddites. We also all fear losing our jobs, losing our ability to provide for our family, right? The ironclad thing behind all of this is our privacy, and our information is being harvested and utilized to sell to us. We talk about the psychology behind sales and children and Captain Crunch, right? The thing that I believe most is that there should be no information out there on me for AI to collect. It should not be legal for any entity to be collecting data from my phone, right? And I think people who long profited off that collection of data are now suddenly discovering that a decentralized AI has taken over their job and is now collecting and utilizing that data. I mean, look, my smartphone, it knows when I use the restroom, it knows where I walk, it knows when I have a cold, it knows what I say, it's listening to me. My marketing instructor was very careful to clarify that in case any of us didn't understand that our phones are listening to us, right? It probably knows my sexual activity, right? I mean, let's be honest, there are no boundaries on what a smartwatch knows. It knows everything about you. It knows your blood pressure. It knows your heart rate. It knows your blood sugar. It's disturbing. Now, by law, we can firewall that information, and we could make that stick. You can put criminal charges on that. Heaven forbid, you could even put criminal charges on an AI, I suspect, right? The wider question of what AIs are going to be or where they're going, I don't know the future. In about 2014, I made my children watch 2001: A Space Odyssey on the 50th anniversary of the movie. Anybody remember that movie? Hal? I made them watch the whole thing. They hated it, and then my daughters, when they turned 14, 15, 16 years old, they didn't hate it anymore. It was very interesting to watch. So those are my thoughts on AI. Obviously, we're not going to put the rabbit back in the hat. If I understood correctly, the combined estimated spending in the next 10 years on AI is estimated to be over $10 trillion, right? Now, here's something for you to ponder, right? So cable TV was what people watched for generations, right? We all watch cable TV, okay? Along comes Amazon Prime and Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus, okay? They run ad-free for $8 a month, no ads, all the movies you ever want, right? Until cable TV's out of business. Fair enough. Then the ads come back. Now every movie I watch on Amazon, I have to watch an ad every 10 minutes, right? Okay, so Amazon, if you ever follow their profit ratios, ran at essentially, not quite, but almost zero profit for 30 years to pull that off, right? And these big companies are, again, doing the same thing with AI. They're going to run at least 10, possibly 20 years with no profit, and they're going to spend $10 trillion building out these AI backbones, right? What is the equivalent in our lives of losing cable TV? They're essentially going after the human cognition. what are they going to do when human cognition is gone and they can charge anything they want to? It's a valid question. That's where it's going, right?
I'm going to take you back to Israel.
Yes, sir.
Israel has been actively working to get individual states to establish laws against, it's called BDS laws, boycott, divestment, and I forget the S on it. And also actually free speech laws, and what it is to limit the speech and what can be said negatively about Israel. And that's even happening in the state of Idaho here. Okay, we do have a sanction, a boycott, divestment, and sanction laws. Idaho has a BDS law that basically here that says that if a company boycotts, does any of this against Israel, then they can't do business with the state of Idaho. Okay, and there's got to be $100,000 or something like this. Israel is also, and there's also a push here in our legislature to try to redefine, I'll call it a little bit of hate speech, about you can't say certain things bad about, there's actually a bottle under there too for you. So anyway, you can't say things bad about Israel, or it can, you can be prosecuted for it. What do you think about Israel trying to influence individual states and their legislation on how they are treated? And I'll go back to this. You can burn the American flag and desecrate it all day long, and nothing will happen to you. But what's being pushed right now is that if you say something bad, if you burn the Israeli flag, if you do something like that, that's a hate speech, and you can be prosecuted. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, like a lot of Americans, I've always been bothered by the fact that burning the flag is even controversial. Like, how did we come to be the kind of country where it's an open question that someone can burn the flag? It's such a horrible thing to do, to burn the American flag. I mean, it is a flag that represents what I consider to be one of the greatest, if not the singularly greatest nation on earth. I think with this discussion, we have to openly acknowledge that nothing quite like the Holocaust has ever happened to any other people group. And that has left lingering issues globally of how to address the aftermath of an event such as that. And I lean back to the legislative process. And again, it's why I don't like executive agencies. The most important thing when you're dealing with an issue like this is you lock all the people in a room who are all accountable to their citizens, and you make them argue about it until they find an answer that seems to work. And I am unabashedly pro-Israel. I unabashedly believe that we must respect their military might. I do understand the significance of hate speech as opposed to other forms of speech, and that our legislators, in dealing with this era that we're in, are going to have to craft laws that differentiate between strongly Semitic hate speech and the expression of very practical concerns about American foreign spending and what is an appropriate way to criticize somebody you don't agree with and have it not be hate speech. And I suspect there's going to be mistakes on both sides. It is not wrong to criticize Israel. They make many mistakes. It is valid to say that we maybe shouldn't send them money. That's a valid opinion. Bang for the buck militarily, they're a pretty good deal, right? I mean, we just watched them take out the entire Iranian air defense network with like 5 of our airplanes we sold them. That's a pretty good bang for the buck. But the nuances of deciding what constitutes hate speech in the context of the country that survived the Holocaust by the skin of its teeth? That's a very difficult question. And I don't believe that we should be defining hate speech very narrowly. Like many conservatives, I could easily have been accused of hate speech the last 5 years, not in relationship to Israel, but certainly in relationship to my political opinions. Look at what the Canadians north of us are going through. I don't know if many people follow Canadian politics that closely. My dad's Canadian. But it's reaching the point in Canada where you can't hardly preach a church service. Probably my speech tonight could be classified as hate speech in Canada.
So I'm all for the First Amendment.
Yep.
And so what I see happening, and actually what you said a little bit, is that, oh, maybe there are limits to the First Amendment. And I wholly disagree with that. And one of the things that I think is, why should Israel, and I don't care whether it's Israel or any other country, have special treatment over the United States? Not arguing what happened in the Holocaust or anything like this, but, you know, that was decades and decades ago. It's like, do I owe reparations for what my ancestors did 400 years ago? Okay? We are here today. And do you believe it is okay and that our First Amendment can be limited and should be limited?
Well, I think a very important thing just to get out in the open there, those who bless you I will bless, and those who curse you I will curse, right? Biblical prophecy, and we should probably just lay that out, right? Now, dealing with the First Amendment, so let me ask this back, do you believe pornography is protected by the First Amendment?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Do you believe that pornography is protected by the First Amendment? What's your personal belief?
My personal belief is it is. It's inappropriate to where it goes, okay? But there are things, and again, the question that we have is, where do we stop? And I'll throw this out, because I had this discussion a while back. Who decides whether it's hate speech? Okay? Well, let the courts decide. Okay, so what it becomes is, he who has the most money and can prevail in courts gets their way. Okay, because if you're a individual, like 99% of the people of the United States that don't have enough money to pay all the lawyers and everything else to do this, if you're some of the wealthy elite, then you can sue me into oblivion.
Oh, believe me, I'm very vulnerable to that
Okay,
right
and
now.
so my question, and this is just a fundamental question, and there's no perfect answer.
Nope, there's not.
Okay, but my question really is, and it does get down to this, and there's some hard stuff that do it. Do you think there are limits to the First Amendment?
The widely accepted court definition is that as a citizen, you are not allowed to openly call for harm to others. And when you are actually asking for other people to be hurt and inciting violence, then you've probably crossed a line on the First Amendment. First Amendment is not carte blanche to say anything you want. It's very, very broad, and it is the best freedom in the globe, but it is not carte blanche to say certain types of things. And I think most people will agree there are things that should not be said and that do have to be controlled.
Right now in Minnesota, right now across the nation, things are being said about ICE needs to be taken out. The president needs to be taken out. All of this, that is not being persecuted. It's okay to say that.
I generally agree that it's okay to say that.
I am very concerned about any politician and about the activities that are going on right now in our country to actually limit our First Amendment rights. Okay, no, you can't go into a church and yell fire when there's no fire. There are repercussions for things like that. Okay,
that's basically, I think, what I tried to say.
Right,
But
right.
yeah,
But then
that's a
I'll
very
get back
good
to
example,
this.
actually.
I'll get back to this. The Holocaust is over decades ago. Okay, the Israel of today is not the Israel of then.
Nope, it's a pretty
Okay.
badass little country.
And so why should they have special treatment, and why should there be even any concept of a foreign country having the ability for us to limit our First Amendment?
I think you can't yell fire in a crowded church example is the best. And I'm sorry, but there are limits to what you can say. I believe that yelling fire in a crowded church when there's no fire is a limit on your First Amendment rights. That was an excellent example. The equivalent of that in many other situations has been adjudicated by the courts. I would much prefer it was done by legislation, not by the court system, so that two people such as you and me could have this discussion and arrive at a conclusion that was as fair and intelligent and practical as possible. But there are limits. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right? There's a difference between expressing your opinion on the country of Israel and inciting violence and hatred against Israelis. I suspect this is not a finished topic. In America here, we're going to be discussing this for the next 50 years, and that's why America is great and many other countries are not. There are limits to your First Amendment rights. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
But why does a foreign country have influence, and why should any foreign country have influence on our state and our state laws and our First Amendment right?
Because our legislators are letting them.
Thank you.
Hello. Glad you're here. I wasn't sure if I wanted to come because I have liked Senator Risch. I've not been here all that long. I'm one of those. But I have worried about the idea of his age and knowing what's coming. And so my thought is I like the idea, I like what you say. My fear is there was some way you could even talk to him to back down, that maybe he feels that maybe it is time to move on. My fear is splitting the vote. I don't know who's on the other side, the Democrats, who's going to be out there, if you know anything about that. And what's the possibility if the three of you are in the race? It seems like that always seems to happen, that comes along and you're throwing out and you end up with the ones you don't want.
It's very important to clarify that I'm running for the primary election. So right now, federally registered in the primary election as Republicans, there is myself, Jim Risch, and a gentleman named Joe Evans from Boise. So I will not be staging an independent run if I lose the primary. If Jim beats me in the primary election, then Jim can go run against the Democrats, the independents, and he'll probably do very well. In the primary, you have to choose right now between me, Jim Risch, and Joe Evans. Rumor has it there's a fourth candidate waiting in the wings, and we'll see if he materializes. He's also, I believe, an honorable man.
So there's no way of getting together with all these people just to kind of powwow and make sure that it's really worth splitting it like that.
I think Idaho elections are on a plurality, so of the three of us right now, the one with the most votes wins.
Well,
Yeah, and then whoever wins this primary election on May 19th, please vote for me on May 19th, will go on to face the Democrats and the independents in the fall. In Idaho, it's most likely that my critical election is the primary. My plan, if I win, would be to move to campaigning full-time sometime early summer. So,
well, I wish you lots of luck.
thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, we have a lady back here that has trouble walking up, so we're going to let her not have to walk up there.
Thank you for being here and explaining to us your position. Is it true that the American money that goes to Israel is used mostly to buy our ammo and tanks and jets and stuff like that?
I believe that is true.
Okay.
I believe that is true. Though, to clarify, I believe the Israelis mostly spend it on airplanes and maybe ammo and bombs. I believe they make their own tanks in-house. They're really quite a remarkable group, if I remember correctly.
Okay, thank you. Glenn Beck always asks a candidate, how are you going to keep your soul if you go to Washington, D.C.?
I don't think anybody can keep their soul in Washington, D.C. That's part of my reason for putting in writing that I'm only serving 3 terms. The truth is that is an enormous power center, and it's going to be a very difficult place to work. It is going to be a very difficult place to be a righteous and godly man. Many men better than me have failed, and many men better than me will fail. The prayers of the people in Idaho would probably be greatly appreciated, and the support of family and community networks certainly, I think, plays a role in that. But I don't think I could go do this for 50 or 60 years and escape unscathed any better than the next guy can.
Any other questions?
Before we get to the donation part, so what do you feel like, in just a simple phrase, the role of government, the federal government is?
National defense, international commerce, warfare, and interstate commerce. As stated, I do not think that a federal agent should be required for a cow to be butchered in Idaho Falls and then turned into a steak in Idaho Falls. And I think that's the reason our economy is failing, right? Currently, your steak you purchase, even if it's butchered in Idaho Falls, processed in Idaho Falls, killed in Idaho Falls, has to be inspected by a federal agent before it can be sold at a grocery store. And I can't see any reason on God's green earth that an activity that's been going on for all of recorded human history should require our federal government's oversight for the sale of a steak in Idaho Falls. And we have got to fix that. I mean, our economy is going to fail if we don't. Our economy will fail if we don't fix that.
So how do you go about doing that? I mean, those are great words, and I
yes,
agree
they are.
with you, but in reality, how do you attack that?
We have to start where we're at, right? I mean, we have built out an administrative state that has usurped a large portion of the control of our country and the management of our country. And that administrative state, bless his heart, Donald Trump's done an amazing job disassembling parts of that state. And enormous credit to him for that. The stats on the number of pages of regulations removed from the Federal Register by him is staggering. It's absolutely staggering. But we have to make changes now going forward, and with the legislation that's coming in the future. And over time, we have to claw that power back from agencies to Congress, from Congress back to the states. And the only real answer, like, I'm not going to go to Washington and be magically charismatic. I'm certainly not Donald Trump. I did get the red tie, though. No, the real answer was my first point about rebuilding families, right? The truth is we have to change the fabric of our soul, because the fabric of our soul as a nation is what drove us to where we're at today. And if you want the answer to your question, it is that we, you and I, have to change our children and grandchildren and how they live.
I agree with that. The one thing that I feel is the proper role of government is to protect our unalienable rights. And really, other than that, the federal government can go, get out of our life, get out of our state. Our state is on the trough all the time, taking federal monies, which controls our schools, which controls our industry, as you indicated, and limits that. If you go back to Washington, D.C., will you be voting on principle, or will you be voting on influence?
I believe you have to vote on principle. At least that's my plan.
So I thought we were over, and I was yelling, how do we donate to your cause? Is there somebody here tonight?
No. JoshRoy4Idaho.com. That's my website. I have a Win Red campaign platform donation tab in there. It allows you to make donations to my campaign directly through my website.
Any other questions? Well, being none, then let's give Josh a big hand. Thank you, Josh. It takes a lot of courage for him to step up here, and thank you so much. You bet. And I'm just going to say a few things here. And I first off, I'm not anti-Israel. Okay, with my questioning, but I am America first. Okay, and you can take Israel and you can put, Saudi Arabia, whomever it is. The United States is influenced by a lot of foreign entities. And I'm America first. Stand Up for Idaho, the thing that we do here is we allow everybody to talk. We'll listen to both sides. And that is the First Amendment right that we have. We start limiting the First Amendment and doing certain things on the First Amendment may sound good on the onset and stuff. And I do want to thank you for taking my hard question and stuff. It's a slippery slope. And we do have to protect and defend our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. If we start letting them chip away in any bit, once you start chipping away, it's easier to chip some more. And one day you'll wake up and you'll find out what happened. And so I encourage you all, everybody, to pay attention on what's happening. Pay attention on what's happening in our state legislature, nationally, and all this. And Josh, you, and what we're all doing, because it does really matter. And just full disclosure, I have reached out to Senator Risch's office and asked him if he would like to call in. He'd probably try to do a Zoom call if we could, give him an opportunity to speak. I will, and we, like I say, we'll let everybody talk. And we really encourage that. So we'll see if that happens. Real quick, we had a discussion the other day on the grocery tax repeal, and it was quite interesting. If you're in support of the grocery tax repeal, there's a lady in the back here that actually has a petition that you can sign and get with her, sign the petition if you're supportive of it. They need something like 70,000 signatures by April. And so there's a big effort on it. If you don't know about the grocery tax repeal and what about it, we actually had a discussion a couple of weeks ago, and Senator Rod Furnace and basically Ron Nate of the Idaho Freedom Foundation had a pretty good discussion about the pros and cons of the grocery tax repeal. And I'd ask you, go back and look at that, and you can make up your own mind. In fact is, there was some discussion after that and through the weekend of that. So it was pretty good. But if you're interested in supporting grocery tax repeal, get with her. and sign that petition. I started the night off talking about an Article 5 convention. This goes back to me saying, I really support our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. I've invited Mark Meckler, and he's the guy that's head of what's known as Convention of States. I actually have invited him to come here, and I did this a year ago, come here to stand up front. I'll set up an event to come and talk and actually have a debate with a constitutional scholar. Let's talk about it. They absolutely flatly refused to come. I did get a response back from their state chapter, the state lead in Boise and whatnot, and they flatly refused to come and debate. My position is this on almost anything: if something is so good and you're so for it, come and talk about it. Let's have a debate. I mean, it can be civil. Let's talk about it. What's the pros and the cons, and let us all figure it out. If they're not willing to come and talk about it, that would be your first red flag. Okay? So I encourage you to take a quick look on those things, and I encourage you to really contact your legislators tonight and say, vote no on those two bills for the Convention of the States or an Article 5 convention. I really do encourage you to do that. That is one of the things that we will stand up for and against, is an Article 5 convention. And I'll say next week, you know, we're going to get into some controversial things, and the Israel thing is a bit controversial. Sharia law is a bit controversial, but you know what? It is happening. We can try to ignore it and, you know, cover our eyes. But if we do that, then it's our fault. When we wake up one day and we look around and they say, how in the heck did we get here? So we have to pay attention. So I encourage you to come next week. And again, Josh, thank you so much for taking this challenge. It is a big, huge challenge. Let's give him a big hand. And thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you. Take care going home.